Well, you meet all kinds of people at a place like the Students for Liberty annual conference in Washington, D.C., including fellow Australians. Although I will say, Stephan, you've kind of been running away. Stephan Livera of the Stephan Livera podcast, thank you so much for saying hi.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
What brings you here, besides to speak? Don't just say, oh, to speak. What's the why? Why are you here to speak?
I want to spread the word of Bitcoin, the word of liberty. I think we have a cultural battle to fight, let's say. And I think a good example is Javier Milei. Like, if you look at what happened with what he did, he got to the stage and look, he had certain ways of being eccentric and being very noteworthy. But he was able to fight this cultural battle, and we now have a explicitly anarcho-capitalist, government head of state, head of government.
Look,
right?
You've gone straight to a topic close to my heart. We've been following that as it's unfolded. We've had people who are Argentinian expats, and actually soon we're going to be having an interview with an Argentinian government minister. That's a spoiler, don't tell anybody. But that's coming up soon on the Aussie Wire. Now, for someone like Javier Milei, a few years ago, the idea that he could successfully become president would have been mocked and laughed at. Why do you think the impossible happened in his case?
I'm going to say the pace of change is increasing.
Right.
If you look now, obviously you and I know very well the hysteria that happened in Australia and around the world a few years ago, and that was obviously a very bad change from a liberty perspective. No one's going to argue there. But I would also say that the pace of change seems to have picked up so quickly.
Yeah.
Right? There's all this different technology and innovation, and okay, people talking about whatever AI, maybe AI is overhyped or whatever. But the point is, the pace of change is so rapid now that maybe there is now an opening for people like Javier Milei and for other libertarians around the world to do what he did. And so that kind of gives me some hope that people have had it and people are starting to realize, not many of them, people are starting to realize how much the state is stealing from them with inflation. They're starting to realize the point of Bitcoin. You've got all these well-known big billionaire investors and people who are talking about Bitcoin, people like Bill Miller and others out there. From the, not necessarily libertarians, these are investor people, and they're looking at Bitcoin being like, hey, I see the reason for this thing. So I think that is what gives me some hope, and that's also why obviously I want to be at some of these libertarian events, obviously to help promote Bitcoin and help libertarians understand that Bitcoin is a key tool in our overall fight here. And if you're not using Bitcoin, it's the equivalent of you're in the boxing ring with one arm behind your back. Like, we need to have every tool at our disposal here.
Well, if you haven't figured it out yet, viewers, Bitcoin's a bit of a topic for Stephan. It's kind of his thing. Now, I do want to ask you, though, because some people get a little bit confused and I have some sympathy for the confusion, to be honest, because on the one hand, people like me say central bank digital currency bad, Bitcoin good. What's the difference? Why can both of those things be true at the same time?
Well, CBDC, central bank digital currency, is really like a bastardization. It's kind of like, a few years ago, you had these business leaders who would say, oh, poo-poo Bitcoin, blockchain is the real innovation. And so what we've seen is they're trying to be relevant in a certain way. And so it's kind of opened up this conversation around, are you as private as you could be? Are you using the best money that you could? And so I think that's why we're seeing such a big conversation about CBDCs. Now, a lot of that is research or pilots. It's not necessarily launched, although in certain countries it has launched. I will note that in Nigeria it was launched and failed, so that's a great example from a liberty perspective, although who knows, it can come in other countries. Cool. Anyway, to bring it back to your point though, to your question, how are they different? Bitcoin is not centrally controlled. There is no central leader, CEO, office, server, country in which it's based. It's all around the world. There is no controller of Bitcoin, whereas with central bank digital currencies, it's literally your money is just on tap for the government. They can create more of it, they can control it, they can put all kinds of conditions on it, on how you spend your CBDC coins. They may say, hey Topher, you've been drinking too much, or you've been doing...
A common problem, I could imagine that.
Right? They could shut you off. And that can be very important in the case of political disagreement, because people can then say, Topher, you're speaking out against the regime, you're speaking in favor of liberty, we don't like that, we're going to shut you out.
Well, it's a great point, because we saw in Canada during the lockdowns, of course, in Canada they had it, not quite as bad as we did in Melbourne, but certainly as bad as other parts of Australia. We saw the trucker convoy come together. We saw people donating to try and help them cover their costs and bills so that they could keep the pressure on. And then the Trudeau government stepped in and said, well, if you've donated, we're going to start shutting down your bank accounts. And Stephan, help me remember, what was it that people turned to be able to still make transactions
Of course,
at that time?
it was Bitcoin, and so there was Bitcoin fundraising used, and so that was what enabled a lot of the truckers to receive these funds, and so I think it helped the protests occur, and that protest in turn helped turn the tide in terms of the common view about lockdowns, because soon after that, because here's the dirty little secret, right? The powers that be don't want you to admit that protests can work.
Oh, yeah.
But guess what? They really can if there's a loud enough voice, if the people speak out, and if people take action, importantly, they can move things and they can turn things around. And so I think it did happen in that case. And now I can't remember the exact detail, but there was a court that came out and said what they did was their use of emergency powers was illegal in Canada.
Correct. So. And in fact, the powers that he had in place got struck down. So Trudeau was quite clever in backing off when he did, and then removing the emergency declaration when he did, because it was inevitable that it was going to get struck down. And he kind of got out of dodge just in advance. But to your point, protests can definitely work, but we have to have the tools of the trade that allow us to live, allow us to transact, allow us to have lives as we go through that process. Coming to the conference here, we've got over 1,000 young people coming from up to 50 different countries are going to be here. What does this say to you about the future of liberty, these ideas? We talked about Javier Milei and the fact that he just spent so much time just preaching these ideas and getting them out there. What does this sort of an event say to you about the future of liberty, libertarianism specifically, but liberty as a concept?
Well, I think it's growing, and I think really a lot of people have been screwed over by the state, various states around the world.
Yeah.
And so now they're interested in these ideas that obviously guys like you and I, we've been talking about libertarianism for how many decades now, right?
Yeah.
But we're now starting to see a lot more people come in and start to actually take the ideas seriously, right? And I think you might have, we as libertarians might have seen, let's say, the libertarian movement in Brazil grow, and now the libertarian movement in Argentina grow. And so all around the world, we're starting to see this. So I think it's a great thing that more people are coming to these events where we're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about liberty, we're talking about ways to do it in practice. It's not just this academic idea, it's now getting to the point of there are more people actually taking action.
It's a great point. There's a simple reality of life. People don't care about politics until it hurts them. And I saw this in Venezuela, obviously a country that's been devastated by bad politics. That was where I had my wake-up call, because I was a bit ambivalent towards Bitcoin until I went there and I met people who were living their entire lives in Bitcoin. They were earning their money in Bitcoin and they were paying their bills in Bitcoin. Why? Because it was hard money that wasn't inflating the way that the Bolivar was at the time. And so it took that kind of real life lesson to make me go, hang on, you're missing something here. There's something about this Bitcoin thing that you've missed. And the silver lining, not that I would wish it on anyone, but the silver lining out of COVID is that it hurt a lot of people. And there's a lot of people now beginning to get active and beginning to think a lot more and beginning to do a lot more. From your perspective, there's a lot of people out there who, like me, I have a Bitcoin wallet. I've got, a couple of dollars worth of Bitcoin in it. I don't routinely use it and transact with it. There's a lot of people like me, and there's a lot of people that have never even gone to the step of even creating that wallet in the first place. Where's the best place for people to go to get that real beginner kind of grounding?
Well, so I work at Swan, and recently we made a free Welcome to Bitcoin course.
This was not planned, by the way. I was not aware of what his answer was going to be.
So swan.com/welcome. And it's a free 1-hour course. I helped write some of the scripting for this myself.
Brilliant.
Delivered by Natalie Brunel, who's a well-known Bitcoin educator, podcaster herself. And so this is actually a free course. People can learn about Bitcoin. I think not everybody is going to be using it day to day, and that's okay.
Sure.
But just start by saving it with it a little bit, right? Even if it's like 1 to 5% of what you would, invest with or save with. And what you'll find over time is, as you learn, you sort of go further down that rabbit hole and you start to see the possibility, the potential of what this could really do. Because if you're a libertarian, if you believe in liberty, you want the size of the state to be smaller. You want less taxes, less regulation, smaller state. And this is really the way that we, the common people, can actually force that issue. Because voting in the ballot box, sometimes it can help, but really, I've heard it described, I believe it was Stefan Molyneux who said, voting is like a suggestion box for slaves. It's just kind of like, we're just kind of putting this...
He was a good cynic, Stefan Molyneux. He knew how to word a good cynical observation.
And so I think Bitcoin will force that issue because it will make the state actually have to compete for your taxation revenue as opposed to just borrowing with cheap fiat credit. So that's the big difference.
Well, it's a fascinating thing because it introduces this idea of currency competition, which is something that is foreign to most people's even concept of how a country could be. But we're going to have to come back to that topic at another time. We are out of time. But Stephan, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Great to chat.